modified if necessary. So we talked about why the prime contract would have to be modified, because the government can't buy unless it's on that contract baseline. But why would you think the subcontracts have to be managed? This is where you answer and I go in for a sip of coffee.
I mean, you're responsible for them, especially if you're the prime, so their work's your work.
Exactly. So I don't want to commit to something on your behalf as a subcontractor, meaning in my prime contract with the government, because if you don't step up to these same terms and conditions to me, then I'm at risk, right? I'm committing to do something and I have no way of getting it done, right? So that's why we have to make sure that those subs get modified. And then the last phase of a contract is the shutdown phase. And this typically begins about 6 months before the end of the contract, and it can extend up until 7 years and 6 months. Why is that? Because part of the contract shutdown is a final audit. And so your contract files have to be complete, which means you have to have copies of every single deliverable you sent in, every single acceptance document, every single invoice. And you have to make sure that you receive payment for everything you did. And you have to make sure that the government accepted everything you did. And during that 6-month period is when you're working with your government counterparts to make sure their files are complete and your files are complete. Because guess what? For the length of time it takes the government to audit a contract, they have up until 7 years. You're not going to be in your position anymore because your contract's over. And your government official probably isn't going to be in their same position because they're going to move off into some other agency of the government. So you want to make sure that all those files are complete so that when they are audited, all the information is there to close out the contract and send you final payment. Government expects work to be done until the last day of the contract. So it seems pretty obvious, but one of the things that you have to keep in mind, and we'll talk a little bit about this when we get to the contract types today, is if you have a firm fixed price contract, that means that the government has agreed to pay the final price that you've stated. If that's the case, you have told the government, we are going to provide, let's say, help desk support 24/7. You are expected to provide help desk support 24/7 all the way up to the last day of the contract. But what do you think happens at 6 months before a contract ends?
People start leaving.
Right? They're nervous. They don't know if they're going to have a job. They want to start make sure they're covering their own nut, right? They want to make sure that they get themselves straightened out. So you'll find people starting to leave the contract. So you'll see companies give people bonuses just so that they stay on. I received one once just so that I would stay on the contract till the very end because they wanted me to go on another contract. But if your people all start scattering to the four winds, you're not able to meet your contractual obligations. The government could terminate you on the day before your contract ends because you haven't provided the products and services that you said you would. Now, you don't want to have a stellar record of performance and then blow it in the last week. But so you need to manage that side of the house. The contract and all the associated work needs to be terminated. So that sounds pretty straightforward. Of course, we're all going to stop on the end date. But let's say you provide a 6-month warranty. How's that going to be? And they buy the product 2 days before the contract ends. You still have to provide that warranty for 6 months. Let's say that there's usually the requirement, the reason they brought you in to do this particular piece of work, this requirement, that requirement still has to get done. So typically there's a recompete for that requirement. So you'll probably apply, you'll probably submit a proposal, and your competitors will submit a proposal. Well, if you win the contract, it's a pretty smooth transition, right? You did what you were doing, you won the recompete, and you continue to do what you were doing. But if you lose the recompete, you're working on the contract, someone else won the new award, and typically there's requirements for transition, where you have to sort of work with the new company to let them know how to do things, or let them, have some transfer of information over to them. So that transition, the government allows you to get paid for, but if they delay a procurement, like They say they're going to award by June 30th, but they don't award till July 31st. That month is additional month of work that you need to be performing that requirement, so that, because they don't have somebody else on board yet. So there's things that can happen at the end of a contract that make it a little sticky. And what you have to make sure of is during that closeout process, you actually have to sign a statement to the government saying, I am not going to bill you for anything else. I absolve myself, I absolve the government from any future claims. Now, the reason why you do that is because in the old days, they had something called an M account. And the best way to describe the M account was it was like this great slush fund in the sky. So let's say I ran a contract and it ended in 2017. And today, I'm looking through my records and I say, oh, you know what? Here's a piece of work that I did for the government, and it was $30,000, and I haven't received any payment. I go back through my bank statements and no, I never received that payment. So I go back to the government and I say, hey, here's the document I produced, here's the acceptance that you gave me on this document, here's the invoice I submitted, and here's the proof that I haven't received any payment. And what would happen in the old days is that the government would say, you're absolutely right. I'm going to go to this M account in the sky, pull down some funds, and pay you your $30,000 because you presented a legitimate claim. So then the government decided, well, perhaps this slush fund in the sky isn't a good way to go. So now what they do is they say, you have to sign this document that says, I won't bring any future claims. So now if that scenario happens, I have no recourse. I have 6 months during closeout to find all my issues and get them resolved then. I can't bring it back 2 years later. And the reason why I can't bring it back 2 years later is now, for the government to pay me, they would have to take money out of their existing program budgets. What program budget, what program manager likes to hear, hey, I'm taking money away from you to pay somebody from 2 years ago, right? So that's not going to happen. So that's why they make prime contractors sign that statement. As primes, what do you think we should do with our subs? Get them to sign a statement. So that 6 months, you think it'd be pretty easy to close out a contract, but you're closing out all your subcontractors and you're closing out your prime contract with the government all during that. Because I, as a prime, wouldn't want to sign to the government that I'm not going to bring any future claims and have some subcontractor come to me and say, hey, you owe me $10,000 for that work I did. So that's what that's all about. Also, during shutdown, people are stressed because they're all sort of nervous about what their next job is going to be. So it's not like the most uplifting kind of work environment, so you kind of have to manage to that as well. And you need to satisfy the customer until the end, as we talked about. You have to close out subcontract work in a orderly fashion. What do I mean by that? Well, I just gave you some examples as to why the contract might be extended. So if the government didn't get their recompete done in time, they might extend me. I, at that point, want to go around to my subcontracts because all my subcontracts terminate when? The end of the contract, prime contract, right? That makes sense. But if the prime contract gets extended a month, I want to go back to all my subcontractors and say, would you please extend your subcontract for another month? Why do I want to do that?
You gotta have their support, that makes sense.
Still need to be providing those products and services. Now, what can the subcontractor do at this point? Do they have to extend?
No, but it would be in their best interest to.
I'll tell you one thing they could do, raise their prices, right? Because they only committed to those prices up until the end of contract award. So what I'm asking them is, would you please extend your prices for the next month or 2 months or whatever? Which is always why it's a good idea to extend your subcontracts out a few months after contract award. Go ahead.
Well, that was my question. If the government extends you for, say, 6 months, can you increase your prices for that additional 6 months?
They will ask for a no-cost extension. And, unless there's a valid reason for why you couldn't, to me, That's going to reflect poorly on your past performance rating when you raise your prices during that extension, particularly if it's only a couple months. But it's a business decision. You can raise them because you're willing to put it to it.
When you use the term no-cost extension, it almost sounds like there's money still left, just extend the time, as opposed to extend the time at the same cost you were.
Right, so no cost increase extension would probably be a better way of phrasing it.
Okay.
So the solution, if you set up good processes in the beginning and you follow them all throughout the contract closeout should be a breeze, right? Because you've collected all this documentation along the way, you've got it all filed appropriately, everything's good. It's when new people come in and they don't follow the process, or old people that have been on the contract for a long time get lazy, that's when you start having problems. Your solution needs to either be transitioned to the client or over to another contractor. That's that transition time. All the deliverables, contract, acceptance, and invoice documents need to be retained. So most companies have like an off-site storage where they just, once a contract is closed out, they just kind of do it there. Government does the same thing. And then your prime contract and all your subs are closed down. Okay, so why do contracts get shut down, right? First one is it's just the end of the contract work. Contract's supposed to go till September 30th, 2019, and September 30th, 2019, we're done. Okay? The next one is that they're transitioning it to another contractor. So maybe you're in a phase of a contract and you do phase one and then the work gets transitioned over to another contractor for phase two. That could be a reason why it shuts down. It's the beginning of a new or a follow-on, of a new follow-on contract. So they may shut down one contract because they want to broaden the scope and have this be the follow-on contract, and that might be a reason. They may decide to transition the work back to the government. So they had wanted you to do the work maybe on a cost reimbursable, and they realized that either you didn't know what you were doing or they didn't scope it properly, but you've run through 75% of the money and you've only done 25% of the work. They may decide to take that task back in-house and have the government people themselves do it. They may decide to terminate for the convenience of the government. So termination for convenience is the good termination. Termination for default is the bad one. So termination for convenience means that the government, in its sovereign capacity, has the right to enter in and out of contracts freely in its own best interest. So the best example I can give you is, for those of you that remember, Base Reduction and Closure Act, right, BRAC. They went around the entire country, looked at all the military bases, and said, which ones can we close because of duplicative efforts or another base located close by that could absorb that work, or whatever decisions they used, right? So we were responsible for putting in local area networks when local area networks were a thing, and in all these bases, Navy bases. And when the government made their BRAC decisions, it didn't make any sense for us to go in and put a local area network in a base that was closing. So the government terminated for convenience just certain CLINs because of that. So we may have had 100 CLINs, and each CLIN was a different base. They didn't terminate the whole contract. They just terminated CLIN 0004, which was Tucson Road. I'm sorry?
Fort Monroe.
Okay, Fort Monroe, good one. I couldn't think of anything close. So that's what partial termination is. Or let's say that all the work I was doing was for Fort Monroe. Like I had a contract for Fort Monroe and they decided through BRAC to close it. Where were they located? Okay. And they decided to close it. Because all my work was at Fort Monroe, they may decide to terminate the whole contract for convenience. Termination for convenience means that they will pay you for all your reasonable costs. So let's say, for example, I had this contract at Fort Monroe and I had to lease a building across the street from the base so that I could be there for customer meetings and handle support things. And let's say that the contract was supposed to last for 3 years and I entered into a 3-year lease. And the government terminates for convenience after year 1. What do you think? Do you think the leasing company's gonna let me out of the deal pretty easily? They're gonna charge me a lease break fee. They may even charge me for a year's worth of rent while they find somebody new to get put in there. So whatever those charges are, the government would pay me those charges because I have to pay the guy. So with termination for convenience, they want to keep you whole. They don't want you to suffer because they had to exercise their sovereign right. So that's how termination for convenience works. Termination for default is the bad one. That means we have not met contractual obligations and the government is terminating us because we are not performing. In this situation, think the government tries to make us whole? No. Think the government charges us for re-procurement costs? Yes, right? Yeah, because it's your fault, our fault, that we didn't perform, and the government's now going to have to spend money to go out and find another vendor to be able to perform this work, so they're going to charge you for those re-procurement costs. So there's a couple main topics to keep in mind as we talk about contract performance, and all I want you to do is think through these in your own organization. There's managing the program and what has to happen in each phase. There's the contract side of the house. There's your people side of the house, who's actually doing the work. There are all these deliverables, there's processes, and there's task orders. Let's talk about a second. So during startup, as far as project management is concerned, you want to make sure that all of your paper is in place. You want to make sure your prime contract, your subcontract, and all your service level agreements are in place, because that's the mechanism that you're going to be able to hold all those people's feet to the fire for meeting contractual obligations. So the government's going to hold you accountable, and you have to have some paper to document or to hold other people accountable. You want to make sure that your organization structure is in place. Most proposals require you to put in an organization chart, where you have to demonstrate how you're going to run this particular piece of business. Not how your whole company is structured, how you're going to run this piece of business. So you want to make sure that's in place and that you've identified the people that are going to work on this contract. What problem do you see here?
People come and go.
People come and go, and what's another issue? So that happens throughout the process. But what happens initially? Okay, people, it's clear I need more coffee. And you're not talking enough to be able to afford me that coffee, so get with the program. So what did I say? The government, you send in your proposal, you should start up all this contract startup stuff so that you're ready when you get awarded. And then you get awarded, the government says you could be expected to work right away. Do you have all the people you need?
Probably not.
Right. And so what's the risk here?
Defaulting on your contract because you're not ready to go out the gate.
Exactly. So you may not have enough people, but do you want to hire all those people before you've won the contract? What if your competitor wins? Yeah, so you have this balancing act. So the way some companies handle it is they say to employees, this is a contingent hire. If we win this contract, we will make you the following offer. What does that do for the person looking for a job? All right, makes them a little queasy because they don't know whether you're going to hire them or not. And chances are they going to stop looking for jobs because you're giving them a no. So this whole sort of area right here is a risk point. You need to secure any necessary resources internally or externally. This could be equipment, it could be information. You need to establish processes for quality assurance, acceptance, and invoicing. Okay, so you want to make sure that anything you turn over to the government is correct. So if it's a list of, they've ordered all these products, you want to make sure that those specific products have been sent over to the government. If it's a report, you want to make sure that the data in the report is correct. Because if anything's wrong, they will not accept your product or service. And if they don't accept, what happens? Why is acceptance critical?
So you get paid.
Right. You